Welcome to another edition of Sound Off Inbox here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off Wrestling Podcast, which you can find each and every Sunday on the Solomonster.com, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or TuneIn Radio. I am the Solomonster. I want to thank everybody for all the feedback to the first installment that we did several weeks ago. I want to try to do these a little more often. And again, these are YouTube exclusives, so we have some content that is exclusive to the YouTube channel. These inboxes are among them, so please subscribe if you have not already done so. And if you like what you hear, you can support the Sound Off by making a PayPal donation on thesolomonster.com. And for those of you who want to send questions into me, either for airing on the weekly podcast or possibly for inclusion on future installments of Inbox here on YouTube, the email address does not change. It is thesolomonster@gmail.com. That is where all of these questions came from. So we're going to dive right into it here. We have a batch of about a dozen, maybe a little over a dozen questions. Just going to try to get through as many of these as I can. And we'll start here with a question from Andrew Cunningham from Moorhead, Kentucky. On your Sound Off episode 343, you talked about the impact of the Las Vegas wedding angle with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and the impact it had on wrestling. Do you think Triple H is responsible for Test not getting the big push I thought he should have gotten? And also, if Triple H didn't put himself in the angle, do you think Test would have gotten that push? I like how we just assume that Triple H put himself in the angle. Go back to the angle here. This was 1999. So I'm not really sure how much power and influence people think Triple H had back in 99. I mean, obviously, as the years went on and he did marry Stephanie, he did gain more influence. But I think we're giving him way too much power to think that in 1999 he was calling the shots as far as who he feuded with and stuff like that. I don't think you can blame Triple H for that. They made a decision. They wanted to go with him. They had a direction for that angle, and they wanted to turn Stephanie heel, and that was their way to do it. I do think that, were it not for the direction they took, they could have taken the angle with Test further than they did. I always thought it was really dumb, whoever's fault it was. I assume Vince McMahon, since he's the one who ends up calling the shots there at the end of the day. I thought it was a real waste of potential with Test because Test impressed a lot of people. He impressed me by going out there and having, if not the best, one of the best matches on the card at SummerSlam 99. A match that I think a lot of people thought, okay, this is going to be a throwaway match. It's a non-wrestler in there with a guy who's green and not that good. But let me tell you something. Test and Shane McMahon went out there in that love her or leave her match, with the stipulation being that if Test won, he had Stephanie's hand in marriage, and I think it was that if Shane won, then he couldn't marry her. And they got people into it. It was a real dramatic match, and it was a good match, too. The Mean Street Posse was out there. They got involved. I think Patterson and Briscoe came down to kind of counteract them. They got involved. So, there was a lot of that going on, but it was a hell of a match. And it really opened a lot of people's eyes, I think, to Test as possibly, I don't want to say the next big guy in WWE, but being something big. And they groomed him to marry Stephanie McMahon, the big angle on Raw. Then they did the big swerve. And you would almost think that, okay, this is going to lead to a big feud now between Triple H and Test. Maybe they'll have a pay-per-view match against each other. Never happened. I mean, I think they had a match on Raw maybe a few weeks later, and Triple H just beat him, and that was it, I think. But there certainly was no big pay-per-view match. There was no big program. It's just, Test was way up here, and then after that angle, he just went way back down, and he never really got back up to that level, I think, for the rest of his career. He was kind of slotted in this mid-card role. He was part of a tag team with Albert. He never quite got back up to that level, and I never really could figure out why. The only thing I can assume is that they knew more than we did as far as what this guy was capable of, and yeah, he went out there and had a great match with Shane, but maybe they knew, he's just not as good as he needs to be, and so we have to knock him down a few pegs, and maybe he'll get better, and I guess it just never happened. But I always found that very odd that they didn't at least try to have a feud, because it was over. People were into it. Test was a hot thing back then, in the eyes of the fans, and I think people would have really gotten behind him if he was looking for revenge against Triple H. And, you could still do the deal where Stephanie turns heel and she aligns with Triple H. That might have made it even better. But I guess we'll never know. Dante from Louisville, Kentucky, another Kentucky resident. What are your thoughts on Hornswoggle recently saying in an interview that his heat with The Rock from a couple of years ago. I didn't even know he had heat with The Rock. Stemmed from Rock mistaking him for a Make-A-Wish kid backstage. Do you think it's childish and unprofessional to take to Twitter to air your beef with a guy, as Hornswoggle did, although he later apologized, albeit sarcastically, by writing his apology on his wrist, instead of just confronting the guy face-to-face? And do you think this also may stem in part from many wrestlers' dislike for The Rock coming back in the first place? I think it might have something to do with that. I think Hornswoggle is good friends with John Cena. He's like a big rah-rah fan of John Cena. And I think when Rock first came back and they were playing up the whole Rock-Cena feud, I mean, I know that there were, reports legitimately of people behind the scenes, other wrestlers and mid-card guys being very upset because, this perception that The Rock is coming back for a big match at WrestleMania, and he's taking spots away or a spot away from somebody else on the card. The whole thing, complete bullshit, of course. Those people not realizing that Rock coming in made everybody a hell of a lot more money for that year's WrestleMania. And The Rock was always going to be in the main event anyway. It's not as though if The Rock wasn't on the card, some, mid-card guy was going to get that spot in the main event against John Cena. Give me a break. So, for all the guys who may have been complaining at the time, to me it just came off as complete idiocy. But nonetheless, I think Hornswoggle was kind of on the John Cena side, and there may have been some legitimate feelings there where he felt that Cena was getting a raw deal from the fans, and here comes Rock, and I don't know what Hornswoggle really does and doesn't believe. I didn't even know he had a beef with The Rock. Apparently he did. I did see the interview he did with the website alternativenation.net. And he goes into detail about how The Rock, when he came back, he mistook Hornswoggle, kind of patted him on the head after he came back from his segment and say, hey, did you see that or did you enjoy it? And, he thought he was a Make-A-Wish kid. He heard Rock joking with Big Show after the fact that, hey, I think I just mistook Hornswoggle for a Make-A-Wish kid. So apparently there was some legit hard feelings there, and Hornswoggle went right back at him. I mean, look at where The Rock is on the totem pole, and look at where Hornswoggle is. I give the little guy credit. Hey, he went after The Rock and let him know how he felt, and apparently since then they've hashed out their differences and everything. Would I go on Twitter with it instead of going to the guy face-to-face? Probably not. Yeah, I would say that's probably a better way to handle your business instead of posting a bunch of sarcastic tweets, as though The Rock even gives a shit what Hornswoggle thinks. I mean, let's be honest here. He's not, shorting himself on sleep, but I have to say, you brought up Hornswoggle. I just watched Leprechaun Origins last night, which is the new WWE Films movie. It's coming. It's out. I guess it's already out on digital download. I mean, that's how I got it. But I guess on DVD and everything, it's not coming out for another month. I don't know how that all works. But anyway, he's in the movie. I'm a big horror movie fan. I actually never saw, believe it or not, any of the early Leprechaun movies, even though I'm a big horror movie fan. I've seen all the Halloween movies and all that kind of stuff. And I've seen bits and pieces from, like, Leprechaun in the Hood, which sounds like the best and worst movie of all time all at once. I've never seen it before. But I figured I'll watch this. How bad could it be? And I was kind of curious how Hornswoggle would be in it. Because they replaced the original guy who played the Leprechaun, Warwick Davis, who was the actor who played the Leprechaun. And Hornswoggle now took that role. And I could tell you, having watched the movie, don't waste your time. Don't bother. The movie sucks. It's no good. And that's not really a knock on Hornswoggle. If anything, I kind of feel bad for him because I guess whatever the hell that leprechaun was supposed to be, which didn't even look like a leprechaun. It looked more like a miniature version of a Cloverfield monster. I don't know who the fuck came up with this idea that a leprechaun should look something other than what a leprechaun should look like. It looked like a fucking alien of some kind. I guess Hornswoggle was in the suit. He was underneath. You would never know. You never see his face the whole movie. I mean, if you didn't see his name in the credits, if you weren't a wrestling fan, you would never know Hornswoggle was even in the movie. So, assuming he was under this costume, he wasn't really able to do much. You can't even really gauge how good of an actor he is, because all he did was just kind of move around a little bit, and that was it. There's no dialogue. There's nothing. You could have put anybody under there. You could have put a 12-year-old child under the costume and had the same effect. So it's not a knock on him. It's just a knock on the movie. It's shit. It's no good. Adnan in Slough, UK. This year at WrestleMania, we saw the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. The way it was talked about during the build-up, it sounded as if it would be an annual thing. What would you think if they changed the Battle Royal rules to such that when it came down to the final two guys, they would fight to a pinfall or submission? Well, I suggested that idea for the Intercontinental title battle royal they did at Battleground a couple months ago. I wish they would have done it there. That would have been, I think that would have made sense. It would have made it more dramatic that way. I would not do that at WrestleMania. I mean, if this is going to be an annual thing now, I think it's actually more dramatic if you just leave it alone and it's a regular battle royal and whoever it comes down to, like this year, for example. There wouldn't have been the same level of drama if it came down to Cesaro and Big Show, and now all of a sudden Cesaro has to pin the Big Show. Who cares? You know, what made that moment so memorable was the visual of him picking the Big Show up in a body slam position. And I mean, a lot of people over the years have body slammed Big Show. That's not really that impressive anymore. Eric Rowan body slammed Big Show on Raw a few weeks ago like it was nothing. But the act of picking him up over his head and holding him there, walking to the ropes and dumping him out to the floor. I mean, I was in the Superdome and people were going crazy. I mean, that was a moment at WrestleMania. And you know, I sit here now thinking about that and I just shake my head because here we are. I'm recording this on September 1st. And to see how far Cesaro has fallen since then, it's just, wow. I don't even know what to say to that. But it wouldn't have had the same effect, is my point. So I wouldn't do that at WrestleMania. I would leave things the way they are. Or if they change their mind one day and they bring back, you know, the Money in the Bank ladder match or whatever, that's fine. It's more dramatic that way. But it's okay, I think, every now and then when they have a battle royal to actually do what you said. Have it come down to the final two. And it doesn't have to happen right away. Let's say the battle royal takes place at the beginning of a pay-per-view. It's, you know, for a vacant title. Comes down to the final two. People going crazy. And then later in the show, they come back out and have their singles match. I like that. That's what they did with Razor and Rick Martel on Raw back in '93. It's the first time I ever saw them do that with a battle royal on a WWF show. And I don't think they've done it since, to my knowledge. So I'm okay with that, just not at WrestleMania. Alexandru Mata from Marietta, Georgia. Of all the tag teams in NXT, which ones would you like to see called up? From the ones I like, none. Because WWE's track record lately, I mean, I know the Shield is doing well and the Wyatts, but you know they've been up for a while now. Their track record of late with the NXT call-ups is not exactly great. But if they actually did something with these guys and didn't just bring them up and then not know what to do with them, like Adam Rose and Bo Dallas and Emma and people like that, I would definitely call up Enzo Amore and Colin Cassidy. Kaz and Enzo are my favorite tag team right now. One of my favorite acts in NXT. I think individually they're not that strong, but together they're awesome. You know, whatever one lacks, the other makes up for. So if Enzo is too small or maybe he's not that good of a wrestler, he's got the big 7-foot-tall guy with him to back him up. Colin Cassidy, I think he's getting better. He's still not great. He's not a great talker. He doesn't have to talk. When he's with Enzo, let Enzo do all the talking. So I think they complement each other. They're very entertaining. And for the people who have no idea who these guys are and you don't watch NXT, hopefully one day soon you'll know, and I'm sure you'll be on board with me. So they would be my first pick. They're my favorite team. There really aren't that many tag teams on NXT. I mean, they're having a tag team tournament right now. The Ascension is the main tag team. I'm sure the Ascension is going to be the first team of all these teams to get called up. Would not shock me if they were on TV within the next month or two. I got to be honest with you, the Ascension doesn't really do it for me. I find them kind of boring. They're kind of dull. But I'm sure they'll get the call up first. They're, you know, big guys, and, you know, Vince still has a hard-on for big guys. But I think Kaz and Enzo would be number one. And another team, and I'm actually not sure if they're a team, but I've seen them teamed up on some of the NXT house shows down in Florida that they've been doing. I know right now in the tag team tournament on TV, on the network, Kalisto, which is the former Samurai del Sol, he's a team with Sin Cara, or Hunico Cara, as I call him. And they're quite good. But I've noticed that on some of the house shows, they started pairing off Kalisto with Sami Callihan under his new name, Solomon Crow, which I think makes for an interesting tag team. Solomon Crow was originally doing this evil hacker gimmick, although he never made his debut on TV, but like at the live events. And I guess Triple H supposedly hated the gimmick, and so now Solomon Crow is not an evil hacker. I don't even think he's evil. I think they turned him babyface. And so that's what he's been doing. although he just got hurt. I don't know how seriously. I think he suffered a chipped bone in his leg or something at an event the other day where he was teaming with Kalisto. My point is, if they're going to be put together as a tag team, we haven't even seen them on TV yet, but we know how good Kalisto is, and anybody who's a Sami Callihan fan from his work on the Indies knows how good he is. Without even seeing them, that's a team I would love to see get called up right there. I mean, you're talking about two guys, realistically, who don't really need to be down in developmental, and they've already been there for several months, so how much longer are you really going to keep them down there for? So that's a team, if the idea is to put them together, I'd love to see them brought up too. I think, them against the Usos and, Goldust and Stardust, you can get some really cool matches out of it. Bryant from San Antonio, Texas. I think it's a huge mistake that Brock Lesnar and John Cena are having their rematch at Night of Champions. They should have waited and have them settle things in October inside the Hell in a Cell. What do you think about that? That's all well and good. Problem is, the next pay-per-view is called Night of Champions. You can't have Night of Champions without the WWE Champion on the card. So they've kind of put themselves in a corner here. That's why I hate these gimmick shows. I strongly dislike these gimmick shows. And Hell in a Cell is the worst, by the way. And I'm a big fan of the Hell in a Cell match. Okay, the Hell in a Cell concept. But this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say, by having these gimmick shows at set times during the year, you're just painting yourself in a corner. So, at Hell in a Cell, ideally you would have two guys in a blood feud who are going to blow it off inside the cage. Well, what if you don't have a blood feud going on right now? Or if you're in the middle of a feud that's not ready to be blown off? So you just, hey, it's October. So that means Hell in a Cell. Time to have a cage match. I think that's stupid. I just think that's really, really dumb. And Night of Champions is not as bad. Hell in a Cell is just the worst example of that, I think. And TLC is not much better, but Hell in a Cell is the worst. But they put the title on Lesnar, and now the next pay-per-view is called Night of Champions, so he has to be there to defend. John Cena lost. He got his ass kicked at SummerSlam, but he's got his rematch clause, so you have to do Cena-Lesnar. They've painted themselves in a corner. The problem is, and I don't know if Brock is going to be on the card at Hell in a Cell. He may not be. There's a pretty good chance he won't be, but who knows? Maybe he's agreed to do the pay-per-views or a few extra B shows and nothing more. I don't know. But, he beat Cena very decisively at SummerSlam. So Cena's entitled to his rematch. The idea that Cena's going to get his rematch and Brock's going to beat him again, although Brock's not going to beat him the way he beat him at SummerSlam, because I don't see them doing that 2 months in a row, but he's got to win that match. I do not want to see Brock Lesnar lose that match. I might be okay with them doing some kind of non-decision where nobody really wins and they have like a real brawl and just beat the hell out of each other, but there's no decision, or it's a double DQ or something like that then leads to a rematch, a final match at Hell in a Cell that Brock wins decisively and then he moves on. I'd be okay with that. Anything but beating Brock at the next pay-per-view, because if to have gone through everything they did by having him end the streak, you make him into this unstoppable monster. He beats John Cena the way he did at SummerSlam, becomes the champion. To turn right back around the next month and give Cena number 16 it would be just mind-numbingly stupid if they do that. So I don't want to see Cena win. If they've got another idea that keeps the title on Brock and leads to a third match, fine. And I think it would make sense to blow a feud off like that inside Hell in a Cell. The problem is you can't really have the kind of Hell in a Cell match that I, as a fan, would want to see. I think back to the Hell in a Cell match that Brock had with Undertaker, to blow off their feud in 2002. That was a hell of a match. That might be my favorite, and if not my favorite, it's one of my favorite Hell in a Cell matches. It was a great match. And it made Brock, who was the young guy on the rise at the time, look like a star. Taker put him over big time. He bled a gusher. I mean, so much blood shed by Undertaker in that match. And I feel like if you're going to do Cena versus Brock in the Cell to end their feud, it should be a bloody affair, but this is PG, it's 2014, and so you can't get blood, which I think, again, is stupid to have a Hell in a Cell match or any cage match and not have blood. But it does make sense to put them in the Cell. I just don't want Cena to win just to set up the third match. If the idea is, well, Cena's got to win to set up the third match, then you know what? Don't do a fucking third match. Because John Cena should not be winning at Night of Champions. Jonathan writes in, over the past few months, several superstars have been injured, like Bad News Barrett, Darren Young, Christian, and Daniel Bryan. Do you think WWE missed an opportunity to bring up somebody from NXT, somebody that would be used better than Bo Dallas and Adam Rose? Perhaps somebody like a Sami Zayn, or someone lower on the NXT card that really is ready but is not having anything done with them like an Aiden English. Well, Aiden English is part of the Vaudevillains tag team, so they actually did find something for him. I like Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn, on last week's NXT, as I'm recording this, it was last week's episode. We're on the road to TakeOver 2. And the announcers talked about how Sami Zayn had set a goal for himself to become the NXT champion by the time he hit, 1 year on the roster. And now that time has come and gone, and he's still not the champion. And at that moment, when I heard them say that, it hit me. Sami Zayn has been down at NXT for over a year. That's ridiculous for a guy like that, a guy that good. For him to be kept down there for that long, I get it. These guys come over, even if they have all that indie experience. You've got to retrain them, or you just want them to learn the WWE way, or slow down, or whatever they, want these guys to do, or how they want these guys to improve. Give them a few months. A lot of these guys, they don't need that much fixing or seasoning. They're ready to go. I'm sure these guys would be fine on the roster on, Raw or SmackDown on day one. So a guy like Sami Zayn being down there for over a year is very sobering. I had not realized it had been that long, but apparently it has been. I had two ideas over the last couple of months. I've talked about this at different times on my podcast, for ways that you could introduce this guy on the main roster. Because I'm concerned. They've introduced Bo Dallas. They had 6 weeks of vignettes. They introduced Adam Rose and those 6 weeks of vignettes with him on the bus, the express, the Jobber Express, whatever he calls it. And that's kind of how they introduce a lot of guys. Not every single person is going to have video packages building them up. I think it's okay every now and then to have somebody make a different kind of debut. Like Santino Marella, when he made his debut, he got picked out of the crowd. You can come up with creative ways to introduce people, or they attack somebody, like the Ascension. When the Ascension is ready to be brought up, I'm not their biggest fan, but you got to bring them up with an impact. So running little videos on TV that says the Ascension is coming, who gives a shit? That's not how you introduce a team like that. The way you introduce the Ascension is on a random episode of Raw or on a pay-per-view. You have them come out there and beat the piss out of the Usos, or whoever are the tag team champions at the time. They come out there, they beat them up, they throw them into the barricade, they throw them into the steps, maybe they powerbomb them through a table, or they do their high-low, total elimination finish that they jacked from Saturn and Cronus, whatever. They've got to make an impact somehow. So that's how I would introduce a team like that. Sami Zayn is an interesting case because you could do vignettes for him, and he's a likable guy, and you can have him showing off his personality and whatever. I almost think that's just too boring. So how else would you introduce him? One idea that I had, and they can't do it now because they already messed this up, but I never would have ended Bo Dallas's little comedy undefeated streak he had going for him. It was like one of the few things he had going for him. I think people were starting to get into it, even though he was the heel. He's a heel, but he's always smiling. He's kind of the heel who doesn't know he's a heel. He's not like some evil heel. Keep that streak going. I thought it would have been pretty funny if they would have had him get to 22-0, so he can start boasting on TV. I beat the Undertaker's streak. Not even the Undertaker could go 22-0, and now people are like, oh my God, now this is all we're going to hear about from this guy each week on TV. And then one week he comes out there and maybe he lays down an open challenge to, some young buck in the back, and out comes Sami Zayn. And yes, there are going to be a lot of people in the audience who have no idea who this guy is. And Sami Zayn, when you look at him, is not exactly spectacular to look at. He's not some comic book character come to life or anything like that. But you would also have a lot of people who do know him. And I guarantee you, the moment he sets foot out there on Raw, the ole ole chants are going to take over the building wherever they are. So he comes down to the ring, he's slapping hands with the fans, and Bo Dallas is kind of laughing and pointing. And anyway, long story short, they have a match, and Sami Zayn wins. Probably on a fluke, a roll-up or something, but he wins. And people go crazy, and the streak is over, and Bo Dallas just has a meltdown, like the meltdown he had that time on NXT, when they had to remove him from the building, which is still one of the funniest things I've seen all year. He just has a complete meltdown, and now you've got a feud, a mid-card feud already made, already set up between these two former NXT guys, and they can go out there and work a program and have some matches. So that was one idea that they could have done, now they can't, to introduce Sami Zayn. The other idea, which is a little more, how shall I say, it's a little more far out there. And again, they're not going to do it, and they're not going to do it because Brock Lesnar does not wrestle on TV, as he shouldn't. I'm okay with that. I think Brock is an attraction. You can't just waste Brock Lesnar matches on some random 3-hour episode of Raw. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, that Brock Lesnar was going to wrestle on Raw. He's the WWE champion. He makes one of his rare Raw appearances. And, he's in the middle of a feud with John Cena, and they're building to a big match on pay-per-view. But, Brock's there. He's smiling. Paul Heyman's like, my client is feeling frisky today, and he wants some competition. He likes this city, and he just wants to have a warm-up before his next big match with John Cena. So we're going to give you people a treat. We're going to throw down the gauntlet here and extend an open invitation to anybody backstage, back there in that locker room, to come on down and test their might against Brock Lesnar one-on-one. And I'll tell you what, we'll even put the WWE World Heavyweight title on the line. Now that gets people interested. When you say there's a title on the line, all of a sudden, people's ears perk up, and it's very rare that we see a world title defense on TV these days. So nobody comes out. They're standing around, and out comes Sami Zayn. Again, somebody who a lot of people will not know who he is. Some people will. So he'll get a reaction. And Brock is just kind of pointing and laughing like, are you fucking with me? What the hell is this? And Heyman's laughing. And Heyman is great in that he can acknowledge knowing who Sami Zayn is. And Paul Heyman can actually get people over verbally on the microphone. Even in a situation like this, he could probably say, well, look, it's, NXT superstar Sami Zayn, one of the shining stars down in WWE's developmental territory. He goes, did you, walk out here by accident? Are you lost? Are you out of your mind? Are you nuts? Do you have a death wish? And, maybe Sammy gives Sammy some mic time, and he says, no, actually, I'm here to take you up on your challenge. And Heyman and Lesnar are just like, you got to be shitting me here. So they don't give this kid a prayer. They don't give him a snowball's chance in hell. But Heyman's like, you know what? Today's your lucky day, kid. Nobody else had the balls to walk out here, but you did. So I'll tell you what. We accept the challenge. We're going to put the championship on the line. And all of a sudden, we have an impromptu title match on Raw, Brock Lesnar against Sami Zayn, which should, by all accounts, be a death sentence for this guy. And Brock toys with him, and he just throws him around like a rag doll, and he's just beating the crap out of this guy. But Brock is not taking him seriously at all. He's just kind of standing there and laughing and looking over at Heyman and pointing, and he doesn't take this seriously at all. And that's when Zayn sees an opening and he starts to build some offense and fight back, and the people are getting into it. Because I have to say, of all the people who I've seen, I've been watching NXT now for almost a year and a half. I've become a big fan of that show. And I can't really name very many other people who get the kind of reaction from the fans. Like, they genuinely like this guy. They look at him maybe as an underdog, but they genuinely like him and they want to see him succeed. They believe in him. They find his moves exciting. They think he's great in the ring. He's got that. Like, his matches, he's always able to get people into it. Even if at first it's kind of, they're quiet and maybe he's not in there with the best wrestler on the NXT roster, because it is developmental. Not everybody down there has the experience that this guy has. But he's always able to get the people into his matches. He's got that. He's got that ability. I think people in this case would get behind him 100%. And the blueprint for this match, what I have in mind when I think about how I would book this match, I think of the Triple H match that he had with Taka Michinoku on Raw back in 2000. It wasn't set up exactly the same way where he made an open challenge and Taka accepted and came out. It was a match that was set up. It was for the title. It was a match that I'm sure nobody gave Taka Michinoku a prayer of getting any real offense in on Triple H. And to Triple H's credit, he made Taka look like a main event guy. I mean, Taka was flying around. He was doing his moves. Triple H was bumping his ass off for the guy. I just watched the match on YouTube recently. It's like a forgotten gem in the history of Raw. You know, it was like an 8 or 9 minute match. It wasn't that long, but there was one near fall. I think it might have been on a moonsault in that match that for a split second, they got you. You know, you thought, holy shit, this guy's going to beat Triple H for the belt. And of course he didn't. He got pedigreed and pinned. But I thought it was a great match. It was an exciting match. That's the blueprint that I'm using for this. I think if they pattern it that same way, Sami Zayn has that ability to get people into the match. You can have that one near fall. Because Brock just isn't taking this seriously, and maybe Zayn comes from out of nowhere with that Yakuza kick or some other move, and he's got Brock down, and he like jumps on top of him and gets a 2.5 count, but Brock launches him into the air when he kicks out, and people are just going crazy, and Heyman at ringside with his facial expressions and sweat pouring down his forehead. I mean, I'm like visualizing this in my head, and I'm thinking, you can make a star in one night. You don't need video packages. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. This guy is good enough. He's the right guy for that role if they ever wanted to do something like that. You can make him a star in one night. One match, you can make this guy a star. So from now on, not that he's going to be in main events right away, because in the end, Brock beats him. Brock can probably get some good airtime with him on an F5 too. Brock wins. And Brock maybe after the match just destroys the poor guy until Cena makes the save. But now you've got a guy who's established, who the people know. They respect him because he's the only one who had the guts to come out and accept the challenge. And even though he lost and he fell short, you know, hey, this is a guy that I can get behind. The problem is, Brock don't fight for free. But I do love that idea. Marcel from Chicago, I think Bray Wyatt should have won at WrestleMania. Bray's character has the same feel as The Undertaker when it comes to being creepy and dark. I'm not sure WWE pushing Bray as the next Undertaker is the right idea, but over time giving him creepy powers like mind control and over time making him a bit more demonic might work. What do you think? I don't think we need Bray Wyatt being an Undertaker clone. People have emailed me before and said, you know, who's the next Undertaker? Who can they start a new undefeated streak with at WrestleMania? Or before Brock beat him, people were saying, oh, do you think Roman Reigns or this guy or that guy can beat Taker and kind of, like, literally take over the character of The Undertaker? You can't do that. Like, there's only one Undertaker. And I wouldn't want to saddle somebody who I thought had potential with that anyway because it's doomed to fail. It's like saying, I'm going to be the new Nature Boy. Or I'm going to be the next Stone Cold. You're dead. You can't do that. You've got to be yourself. Nobody else can be that character. So I don't think there should be a new Undertaker. I mean, hey, if you want to make Bray Wyatt a more, you know, darker, demonic character, then by all means. But just don't pattern it after The Undertaker because it's not going to work. And I'm with you, by the way. I think he absolutely should have won a WrestleMania. I think that was a big mistake. I think if they were going to do 3 matches with him and John Cena, you can have Bray get the big win at WrestleMania. And then Cena could come back and win the rematch, and you have the rubber match at Payback like they did. I'm with you. I think they made a big mistake by not letting Bray get a big win at WrestleMania. There was no reason for it. There was no reason for Cena to win. And Bray never really got a legitimate win over Cena through that whole feud. You know, Cena won the first match fair and square. He only lost the second match because he was scared of a 10-year-old boy for some unknown reason. When he tried to escape the cage. That was such a shit match with a shittier finish. And then they had a really good match, a really good brawl. I forgot the stip. At Payback, it may have been Falls Count Anywhere or Last Man Standing. Maybe Last Man Standing, I think. But, yeah, he should have won at WrestleMania. Daryl from Los Angeles. While listening to the mailbag on Sound Off episode 334, you mentioned the characteristics of some great heels, such as having no desirable traits to the audience. The first name in my head was Randy Orton. From his run as the Legend Killer to his time in Rated RKO and uncomfortable family feuds with Triple H and John Cena, I think Randy may be the best heel of the current generation. Also, with Randy having double-digit world championships, where do you think he ranks all time? I believe he is underrated and could potentially be on par with the legends of WWE. Well, if you base your belief of where a guy stands, up against other wrestlers or as a Hall of Fame candidate based on how many titles they've held, then sure. I mean, you could say that about any guy from the current generation. Everybody is like a 5-time this or a 10-time that. It's not as impressive. For John Cena, let's say, to win 15 world titles and do it 20 years ago, that would be impressive. Today, the number of titles you win is not really as impressive as it used to be. Orton, I think, what is he now, like a 10-time champion or an 11-time champion, something like that? I think he's a 10-time champion. And he's won Intercontinental titles, and he's a Royal Rumble winner. He's headlined WrestleMania before. So, yeah, he's way up there, He's up there with John Cena and Edge and guys like that. You have to put him up there. Orton, here's the thing about Orton that's weird to me. Orton's a weird one. Randy Orton is really, really good. He does a lot of the little things right. He's as good at that as anybody on the roster. Some people say, oh, he's too slow. He uses a lot of chin locks, and he does. I do think he probably relies on the rest holds too often, but he's a heel. He knows he can get people to hate him by slowing the match down and putting a guy in a rest hold. He's even said that in interviews. He goes, the more people chant chin lock at him, the more he's going to do it. Because he's a prick. He's a heel. And he's very good at it. So when you say Randy Orton may be the best heel of the current generation, I'm hard-pressed to find a better heel in WWE. You have some newer guys like a Bray Wyatt, but, I can't call Bray Wyatt a great heel when he gets cheered all the time. And that's not his fault. Or is it? Maybe it is his fault. Maybe there's other things he can be doing. If he really wanted to be a vicious heel that people hated, then Bray Wyatt has to go out there and find things to do with his character that make people hate him. So maybe it is his fault. Randy Orton, when he goes out there, some people will cheer him. He's got a finish that's easy to cheer for because it's a great finishing maneuver. But Orton is a guy who, when his music hits and he goes out there and he does a little douche pose that he does on the ropes, that's another thing. Even his poses, he looks like a douchebag when he does it. I'm watching a pay-per-view with my friend and his wife last month, and they're casual fans at best, her especially. Whenever Orton comes out and does his pose, she's like, ugh. And she's like, God, he's such a douchebag. I'm like, exactly, that's what he's supposed to be. He's doing his job, he's playing his role well. But in the ring, with his mannerisms, the way he moves around, and even his moves. He had that match with Roman Reigns, and I thought Reigns was fine, but Orton was the one who made that match. When Reigns came at him for the spear, and Orton out of nowhere caught him and scooped him and did that snap power slam, that was freaking awesome. So Orton can do things when he's motivated. When he can do things in that ring that not a lot of other people can. He makes it look smooth. He makes it look easy. He's a great professional wrestler. He can be a little slow. His matches can be very boring. For example, Randy Orton versus Sheamus, anytime they're in the ring, cure for insomnia, my opinion. But on the totem pole of all-time greats, would I put Orton, for example, in my top 10? No, I wouldn't. But he definitely would be up there. If you're going to talk about John Cena and Edge as all-time greats from the current era or the most recent era, I don't see how you can not put Randy Orton on that list. Now, if you were to ask me, Solomonster, who do you think is the top heel in WWE from the last 20 years or from the last 15 years, which is a question that I got asked by somebody recently, that's a little bit harder. But if I had to settle on, I would give you two names. I would give you one wrestler and one non-wrestler. In my opinion, one of the greatest heels in the history of wrestling, in the history of WWE all time, not just the last 20 years, is Vince McMahon. The Mr. McMahon character was a freaking awesome heel. He was the perfect heel. So he would be at the top of my list. If I had to pick another guy, if I had to pick a wrestler, I would go with Edge. And Edge is one of those guys who would make comments like that in interviews about, I don't want to have any redeemable qualities. Chris Jericho, who to me, I don't look at Chris Jericho as being an all-time great heel. Although that period in 2008 when he was doing the silent but deadly character and he feuded with Shawn Michaels, that was great stuff. But when I look at Jericho, he's more all-time. He's more of a, he's a better babyface than a heel. But Jericho is another guy who said when he turned heel in 2008, they wanted to make a t-shirt for him, and he said no. And they're like, why? He goes, I'm a heel. People are supposed to hate me. Why would they buy my t-shirt? don't make me any shirt. And he had to fight for it. He actually fought against them making a shirt that would have made him some money. But he didn't want to do it because he committed himself to that heel character. Edge was the same way. Edge said, I want to do whatever I can to make people hate me and not have anything about me that they could like, that they could cheer for, nothing. So when he got moved over to SmackDown, and he had SmackDown all to himself, and he was on the non-Triple H brand, so he couldn't be held back. This was his show to do with whatever he wanted to. And I think he hit a home run. Because for years there, SmackDown was Edge. That was his show. He carried that show on his back. And the stuff with Vicky, I mean, Edge was great. And when I think of all-time great heels in WWE from the last 20 years, Vince and Edge are really, the two top names that come to mind. CM Punk, when he was a heel, he was a great heel, but he wasn't heel for long enough, I don't think. Those are the two that come to mind for me. Millie from Philly. I swear that's what he wrote here. 3 quick questions about Ric Flair from 1991 to 1993. First, who was Flair originally supposed to drop the big gold belt to? I've heard Sting, Lex Luger, Barry Windham, even Scott Steiner. Which one is accurate? So here's the deal with this. We have to go back a little bit here. If we're talking, now you said 1991 to 1993, so that's how I'll answer the question. Obviously, if you're saying who is he originally supposed to drop the big gold belt to, that goes back to late 80s into 1990. He wanted to drop the belt to Sting. Sting got hurt with the knee injury, so then WCW wanted him to drop the belt to Luger, and Flair said no. He'll work with Luger, but he made that promise to Sting, and he wants to stick to it. And true to his word, Sting came back from his knee injury, and at the Great American Bash, I think it was in 1990, Sting beat Flair for the belt. If you're talking about 91, which is when Flair left or got fired and went to WWE, my understanding has always been that WCW wanted to put the big gold belt on Sid Vicious. They wanted Sid to be the champion. He was even supposedly made the promise that he would become the world champion and offered a new contract, but he decided to leave. And he said, nope, I'm leaving. I'm going to WWE, which he did. He popped up there on TV that summer, in the summer of 91. So when Sid announced that he wasn't sticking around, he was leaving and going to the WWF, plans changed, and I believe they wanted Flair to drop the belt to Lex Luger. I think that had been the plan, that had been the idea. They wanted Luger to be the champion. Meanwhile, Flair was in the middle of this big dispute. Jim Herd was brought in to lead WCW. He had these plans for Ric Flair to be phased down and to change his whole character, put an earring in his ear, have Flair cut off his trademark hair. He was going to dress up like this character out of Spartacus. This guy must have been eating a lot of mushrooms back then. Flair didn't want to have any of that. And Flair, I think he saw the writing on the wall and said, I can't be here. This is just not going to work. This is not going to happen. And that's when the problems really began between the two sides. And, back then, Flair was the champion, and the champion had put a deposit of $25,000 down on the belt. That was kind of an old school thing that they did. That was why when Flair came into WWF, he had the big gold belt with him, because they never paid him his deposit back on the belt. He said, hey, unless I get paid back the money I put down, you're not getting your belt back. And eventually they did get the belt back. I guess they must have paid the money. But there was just a lot of animosity between the two sides. And there had been a discussion that, okay, instead of you appearing at the Great American Bash and dropping the belt to Luger, since Flair didn't want to do that, why don't we have you drop the belt to Barry Windham instead at either a live event or a TV taping or something a few weeks before the pay-per-view? So there had supposedly been an idea, and Flair may have talked about this in his book. It's been so long since I read the book, I don't know. Barry Windham certainly is of the impression that he was getting the belt. Although that didn't make any sense, because I think the match that was supposed to happen at the Bash was going to be Flair and Luger. So the only thing that would make sense then is they would have given Windham the belt at an event a few weeks before, let Flair drop it to Windham, only for Windham to essentially be a transitional champion and probably drop the belt right back to Luger at the Great American Bash. It all sounds very convoluted, and there are different stories floating around. That's always been my understanding of it, and these guys have talked about it on the record in interviews. You can probably dig up interviews that Windham has done and Flair, and they'll probably have differing opinions on what the plan was. But again, I had always been of the impression that none of those guys was the top choice of WCW. They wanted to put the belt on Sid, and when Sid said, I'm leaving, so that's not going to happen, they wanted it on Luger. That wasn't going to work for Flair. Hey, why don't you drop it to Wyndham? That never happened. I don't know that Flair didn't want to drop it to Wyndham, or I think he got fired before he even had a chance to do so. I mean, what ended up happening was, I think Jim Herd, they kept having conversations, and Herd was kind of like, fuck you, we don't need you, and so the match never happened, and Flair never did drop the belt. It's so weird now, all these years later, to hear these stories about all these problems over the championship. Even the Montreal Screwjob and Bret Hart, I can't drop the belt in my home country to Shawn Michaels, and Vince McMahon had to concoct this grand plan to screw Bret out of the belt, and how that whole thing went down. And in 2014, we all look at this as, championships are not exactly as valuable as they were back then, I guess would be the best way to put it. They're not treated with the same kind of reverence, and wrestling now is more kind of out in the open than it was back then. Now it's all entertainment, and back then people were still trying to protect the business, and it's just funny. It's just, I don't think a younger fan or a young kid now watching wrestling would hear these stories and really be able to have any sort of concept like, why was this a big deal again? Why were there lawyers involved? Why was there fighting? Why couldn't they just, make a new belt or whatever? Like, what's the big deal? Especially now, because there's no real competition. Back then you had WWF and you had WCW. So there was that competition. Now, I mean, TNA is not competition. ROH is not competition to WWE. There is nobody else. It's just them, and that's it. And that sucks. But I can only imagine a younger fan having no concept of any of this and thinking, boy, these people are stupid. They're arguing over nothing. What is the big deal? Because they just don't know. It was just a different era. It's a different time. The other question here that Millie had on Flair, how come WWE never mentioned Ric Flair breaking the record for most world title wins when he won the Royal Rumble? Because back then, and even now, with the exception of UFC, at least now WWE acknowledges Brock Lesnar as a UFC champion. There was a period of time where they wouldn't have even acknowledged that. I don't even think they mentioned that when he first came back. Maybe they did, but WWE does not mention other lineage when it comes to other wrestling organizations. They don't acknowledge that sort of thing, title history from other companies, especially back then, because they were in competition. Why would they mention the NWA on the air? There's no reason to. They just didn't acknowledge that sort of thing. Aaron wants to know, what are your thoughts on Adam Cole? I'm a big fan of his, and I think with his mic work, he could be a main event guy in WWE or TNA. And seeing how young he is, he could have 20 more good years in wrestling. I'm a big fan of Adam Cole. Adam Cole, baby! Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. I like his work. I saw an interview he did. The whole YouTube video was up. He was on with Sam Roberts. This must have been before the War of the World show that ROH did with New Japan back in May. And he was the ROH champion at that time, and they were sending him around to do interviews. And you will not find a guy that is more articulate and professional and likable. Like, he wears it well. Like, I could see this guy in a suit going around doing PR for WWE. Like, he is the model employee when it comes to that. So in terms of his ability and in terms of him being able to be that guy they want him to be and wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do radio interviews with a smile on his face and look the part and sound real impressive, he's the guy. Like, I could definitely see him in WWE. Now, do I see him as a main event guy? I'd like to think so, maybe down the road. I think he would have to probably go through a lot of shit before he ever got to that level, because he is a smaller guy. I think he's like 5'10 or 5'11. But you can't just disqualify him because he's small, because you're in the era of small guys now. CM Punk was not a big guy. Daniel Bryan headlined WrestleMania this year. I mean, largely because of the fans, but he still main evented WrestleMania and won 2 titles, 2 belts. So who am I to sit here and say, well, Adam Cole's too small, he'll never get a shot. Maybe he will. Last year, supposedly, Adam Cole went to a tryout camp for WWE, and he was one of the guys who impressed them, and there were some reports that he had actually been offered a deal, and he may have already started to go through some of the testing they do before they sign you to a contract, and it was his decision to re-sign with Ring of Honor. I don't know how accurate that is, and if so, I don't know why he would have done that. You get that far in the process. Obviously, he had some interest in going to WWE, or else he wouldn't have gone to the tryout camp. I mean, that's a fact. He did go. So there was interest there, obviously, on both sides. Why it didn't work out, I have no idea. I've just been of the impression it wasn't a WWE decision, that it was Adam Cole's decision. That's for you to ask him, I guess. But could I see him there one day? Sure. I hope he does make it there. I really do. I'm entertained by him, and he's a great wrestler. This comes from Gerald Moore from Edison, New Jersey, currently aboard the USS Harry Truman. He's got 2 questions. When wrestlers from ROH, New Japan, etc. come to WWE, how does WWE see what they can do in the ring? Is it via tryouts, or do the wrestlers that go for tryouts bring their own highlight tapes, similar to how they do for football and basketball? Or does WWE simply YouTube, more or less, like we all do? There's a lot of different ways that they look for talent, or, scout talent. They actually have people. I know Gerald Briscoe has done this before. Jim Ross used to do this, where they would send guys. If they were looking, let's say, for amateur wrestlers, they would send them to amateur wrestling meets and events and scout them there. They want to scout Olympians and stuff like that. But generally speaking, how the process works, they have these tryout camps a few times during the year. I mentioned that in the Adam Cole question before. Kevin Steen. Kevin Steen's another one who just signed with WWE. He just reported to the Performance Center on August 25th, so he's now officially down there in training, getting ready to make his debut. He went to a tryout camp earlier this year. There were reports that he was really trying to lose some weight before then and slim down a little bit, look his best, and he went, and he was one of the guys whose promos and his in-ring work really impressed them. And, obviously it did. It got him a contract. So I think a few times a year they'll have these tryout camps, and a lot of guys, Roderick Strong was a guy from ROH who went also, I think maybe possibly at that same camp, although he didn't get a call back. So they have the tryout camps. They also will take recommendations from people. William Regal has recommended, because he and Triple H are good friends, and I think they value his opinion when it comes to talent. And I know Regal has recommended a few people. Regal was one of the people, I think, who recommended Daniel Bryan back in the day for them to look at him. Look at Adrian Neville and Prince Devitt. Okay, as the story goes, somebody showed Triple H a match many years ago between Adrian Neville back when he was Pac and Prince Devitt on the Indies. I don't know what match or when it would have been from. I'm sure it was an incredible match, and it blew Triple H away. He wanted both guys. He went after, I think they went after Neville after he saw that match, and they got him, and now they have Devitt. So, depending on how their careers go, we look back 5 years from now in WWE, that match, I would love to know what match between them it was, because that match may go down in the history books as having quite the lasting impact on the wrestling business. So there are cases like that too, where they'll get a recommendation from somebody and say, wow, that guy's good, let's see more of his work, or let's get him down here. Kenta's another one who just signed with WWE, came over from Pro Wrestling Noah in Japan. Kenta has said that it was always a dream of his to work for WWE. And it was a big stir a few months ago when he traveled all the way from Japan. I think he had some downtime between tours, and he flew all the way over here, almost in secret, I think it felt like. And he was down in at the Performance Center for about a week. And I think he probably was doing drills and probably working with some of the trainers and showing what he was capable of. I think at first he denied it, but we can look back on it now, and now we know why he came down there. So in his case, he flew all the way from Japan to Orlando, spent a week down there, and showed him what he had. Showed him, what he was all about, and it made an impression, and he got a contract out of it. So it works differently for different people, but they do have tryout camps a few times during the year, and I think that's really the bulk of where they get a lot of these guys from. That and the scouts. They have people who are always watching at different indie shows. And if you're an independent wrestler, listening to this right now, wondering the same thing, and you hope to one day be in WWE, always when you're out there and you're working, always think that there may be somebody out there important who's in the audience watching, whether they're directly from WWE or not. Because I know for a fact, because I know some people who will work at these independent shows who don't necessarily have any aspirations to be, a big WWE superstar, and in some cases they do. And there have been people from WWE who will show up at a show and will watch the matches, and they're looking for somebody who may catch their eye. And if somebody does, they go back to whether it's Triple H or somebody else in management, and say, hey, I saw a guy this weekend. He was pretty impressive. Let's keep our eye on him. I think Matt Stryker used to do some of that for WWE because he's another guy who came from the Indies and never forgot where he came from, and he would go back to those shows, but he was always watching and trying to pay attention to anybody who, he probably thought might have some potential. So always keep that in mind. Always assume there's somebody watching when you go out there. Just give it 100%, and you never know what may happen. Gerald has one more question here. With TNA seemingly on the rocks, why do I see on websites reports that so-and-so wrestler, blank wrestler, has renewed their contract with TNA? Why do that if they could potentially be going out of business? Do they have money to be making... Do they have the money, I should say, to be making these moves? Well, first of all, until TNA actually goes out of business, they're still a company. They're still operational. People still work for them. People still, their lives depend on that paycheck they get from Dixie Carter and TNA. Just because TNA is going through some tough times right now, and they're not in a good position right now. And I talked about that on the podcast this past weekend, episode 343. These reports about the Velocity Network might be a home for them if Spike doesn't renew them, and the fact that Spike still hasn't renewed them is an ominous sign. So the future looks bleak for TNA, but they're still alive. They're still alive and kicking, and they're not going anywhere. They're going to be on Spike through the end of the year, Spike has said. So you can't just fold up tent and die. They still have a business to run. But why make moves like that? Why sign people to contracts? The way it works, my understanding, again, with TNA, unless you're a big star, like a guy like Kurt Angle, a guy like Sting, those guys are not working per date. They're getting a guaranteed money figure. Where the money is coming from, if Spike is kicking in some of that money, I'm sure Spike did kick in some of that money in the past for guys like Hogan and Sting. They're probably not doing that now. But big guys like that are going to get their money no matter what. I believe when it comes to almost everybody else, not everybody, maybe not the biggest stars, but a guy like a Manic, for example. I think T.J. Perkins just re-signed. I think they announced the new contract with TNA. I'm just using him as an example. I don't know the guy. I don't know what his contract looks like, him specifically, but from what I can gather, they're signing per appearance deals, which means you only get paid when you actually appear and you compete and you perform at a TNA show. So if I were to sign a contract right now as a mid-card guy or a lower-card guy in TNA, they're not going to say to me, okay, your salary, you're going to be making $100,000 a year. You're getting this guaranteed amount of money. I'm probably only getting paid when I make appearances. So if TNA is not going to have a lot of shows, which they don't have any house shows, I think, after either this week or next week. I don't think, aside from some TV tapings, they have any house shows at all on the schedule unless they add some new dates. Then I don't get paid, which means I have to work elsewhere. I have to work other indies. I can't just rely on money from TNA. So TNA can sign anybody they want to a contract. All that means is they have these guys under an agreement. They have a commitment from them where they probably get first priority. And so if they get a new TV deal and they're going to soldier on and survive, they know that we have the bromans under contract and their first priority is to us, not to ROH, not to Evolve, not to PWG or any other promotion. So that's the nature of these contracts that they're signing. That's why people are re-signing left and right with TNA. It's not like TNA has all this money, this guaranteed money to just throw at them. I think with a lot of the lower card guys especially, that's how these deals work. And if they don't appear, if they don't perform, they don't get paid. And they have to work elsewhere. They can't just rely on money from TNA. They've got to work other indies on the weekends and stuff like that. And when there's no TNA show, well, there's a show somewhere else. This comes from Corey. Do you think there is still big money in an Austin vs. Goldberg match, say at the first WrestleMania after Undertaker retires? I think it could still draw big money, and WWE will try something big at the first Mania without an Undertaker match. Austin against anybody is going to draw money. I think Austin vs. Goldberg, yeah, there's still probably plenty of people out there who would love to see the match, and it would be a draw. It's not going to be anywhere close to the kind of draw that match would have been 10, 15 years ago. So I don't see it as being some big-time draw. It's not going to, for example, it's not going to draw the money that Cena vs. Rock did. Goldberg was on top for a pretty short period of time. Austin wasn't exactly on top for a long time either, but he was around a lot more than Goldberg was for many, many years. Goldberg really not that long. I think you had a certain window where that match would have been huge. And now that match would just be like, oh, okay, Stone Cold. You know what? It would be a bigger deal that Stone Cold is just coming back at all. More than the idea of Austin versus Goldberg. I mean, it would be a big match, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as big as it would have been once upon a time. So you could still do it. I mean, you could say the same thing, I guess, about Sting and The Undertaker, right? Everybody's jizzing their pants at the idea that we may get a Sting versus Undertaker match at WrestleMania next year, if Undertaker isn't already retired. That's a match that should have happened 15 years ago. 10 years ago. It's not gonna be the same if they have that match next year when, Undertaker is falling apart and Sting now he's in good shape for a guy his age, but he's also going to be 56 years old. Wearing a t-shirt with a bald spot on his head. It's not the same. So yeah, it would make money, but I actually think there's more money in putting Austin, if Austin wants to come back, and I still think he's not. If Austin hasn't come back yet, if he didn't come back at WrestleMania 30, he's been out for 11 years now. He ain't coming back. I know he talked to Paul Heyman on his podcast recently, and he was really giving the impression that he would be open to doing something at WrestleMania 32, which I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but I think the belief is that WrestleMania 32 is going to be in Dallas, so they're going to be in his neck of the woods in Texas. The idea that Austin could come back for one last big match in the state of Texas is kind of alluring to him. It's just, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't even know that he would pass a physical, and he would be allowed to wrestle for them. I mean, if he's got the same neck problems Edge had, they won't let Edge wrestle. And Edge is a lot younger than Austin. Why would they let Austin wrestle? So I don't see it happening. But I think there's more money in Austin against one of the current guys. I for some reason, I think Austin against Dean Ambrose, with Ambrose as a heel. Because I still think the real money in Dean Ambrose, as popular as he is right now, is in a couple of years maybe as a really evil, sadistic, twisted heel. And Seth Rollins as the big baby face. I think the roles are going to reverse at some point. And I think when they do, and Ambrose is the only guy on the roster right now, the closest thing that reminds me of Steve Austin back in the day as this like rebellious renegade character that people would get behind, anti-authority. In this case, I guess he's literally anti-authority, Ambrose is. I think there's more money in a match like Austin versus Ambrose if you build it up right. And that way you take one of your younger current guys and you put him in there with Stone Cold instead of bringing back basically two old guys, just to make a buck. Even Rock, when he came back, Rock worked with John Cena. John Cena's younger than him. John Cena's the top guy in the company. You bring Austin back, you're just going to bring Goldberg back for one match and it's almost a waste of Austin, I think. And no offense to Goldberg, but, I mean, come on. I think Austin versus Ambrose or Austin versus somebody else from the current roster would be a far bigger match. This comes from Brandon. My question is regarding the best wrestler in the world, in your opinion. I have heard you in recent podcasts refer to Okada and Tanahashi from New Japan as the best in the world, but where does a guy like Daniel Bryan fit in here? In WWE, he's a shell of his former self, but even so, is still such a talented performer in the ring. In my opinion, at his peak, he's the hands-down best wrestler in the world. So, where do you rank a guy like him? Where does he fit in the conversation? And who is your pick for top performer on the planet? Well, I mean, you can't really rank Bryan because he's out. And I don't see him coming back until next year. So if Bryan's out for months and months and months, you can't really rank him as the best anything in the world right now. When he's back and he's healthy and he's having matches again on TV, he's not the same performer he used to be. He's older now, he's hurt, he may have to change his style now to protect his neck. But most importantly, he's just not really able to go out there and have the same kind of matches he did on the Indies and in Ring of Honor. You just can't do that. So he has it in him, but you could say that about everybody. Everybody has it in them. Seth Rollins has it in him. Dean Ambrose has it in him. We've seen matches of theirs on the independent scene. When you go to WWE, you have to wrestle a certain style. So you have to just kind of judge things as they are. If you're asking me for my opinion, I mean, it's such a subjective thing, but if you're asking me for my opinion, who's the best wrestler in the world right now, I think of guys like Kazuchika Okada, who I've become a big fan of from what I've seen of him in New Japan. It's not like I'm able to watch Okada matches every week, but I've seen a lot of his work, especially recently, over the last, month and a half, I've seen a lot of his work. And the guy's freaking awesome. And it almost doesn't even matter who he's in the ring with. He can be in the ring with another guy as great as him, like Hiroshi Tanahashi. He could be in the ring with a guy like a Lance Archer or a Carl Anderson, who are good, but nobody's going to call them the best wrestlers in the world. But, they're over in New Japan as the Americans over there doing their thing. Doesn't matter. Okada goes in there with them. They have a great match. And when Okada is in there with a guy of his caliber, I mean, it's like magical. The matches that he could go in there and have. So I'm a big fan of his. He probably, it's hard, to say whether he would be it or not. Shinsuke Nakamura is another guy. Nakamura, a lot of people would actually slot over Okada right now. Bray Wyatt is a huge fan. He's a big mark for Nakamura, which I was not aware of until recently. And he's also been spotted wearing the guy's t-shirt. Daniel Bryan just did some PR at some WWE event. He did an interview with somebody, and they were talking New Japan, and they were talking the G1, and Bryan was all excited. Bryan sounded more excited talking about the G1 than any of the questions they asked him about WWE and the shitty storyline his wife is in right now. I mean, I can't say I blame him, but he was going on and on and on, and Daniel Bryan, who you apparently, for example, Brandon, think is the best wrestler in the world, he himself thinks that Nakamura is the best wrestler right now and the most entertaining. I think that might have been what he said. The most entertaining performer is Nakamura. So some people would say him. I would throw AJ Styles out there too. I kind of go back and forth between Okada and AJ Styles right now. I can't really pick one over the other. So I would kind of put them as a tie together at the top of my list. AJ Styles is 37 years old. He got let go by TNA in that they could have gotten him back and they didn't want to pay him what he felt he was worth. They let him go. They let their biggest star walk. Their franchise guy. That would be like WCW letting Sting walk away. Or WWE allowing Bret Hart, who became their franchise player, who could go in there and have great matches with almost anybody, and they built everything around this guy, and he was the workhorse in the company during that whole new generation period. And Shawn Michaels was too. But imagine Vince just letting either one of those guys walk. I don't want to say Steve Austin or The Rock because AJ Styles is not at that level of popularity, but that would kind of be what it would be like. And it was a boneheaded move on TNA's part to let him go. And what's ended up happening now is AJ Styles is having the best matches of his career. 2014 is going to go down as the best in-ring year of his career. Just from his New Japan work alone. I'm not even talking the ROH stuff. Because he's splitting his time between New Japan and ROH. He's doing other indie shows. He's probably making a hell of a lot more money than he did with TNA, working all the different indie shots now. But you just look at the matches that this guy has had over the last month and a half. Styles against Tanahashi. Awesome match. He could be in there with a guy like Togi Makabe. Great match. He was in there with Minoru Suzuki, which was unbelievable. That match in the G1 was just off the charts. People were just raving about it. I'm like, all right, now I'm going to watch it. It's not going to live up to expectations. I watched this match. It was like 20 minutes, and it just blew me away. I was like, holy shit. So he could go in there with almost anybody, and he has a great match. It's almost like he's got like a fire lit under his ass ever since he let TNA go. It's almost like his way of saying, F you, TNA. This is what you let go of. And he's incredible. He's had like this career resurgence. And I have to say about the G1, I was blown away by this year's G1 climax. Especially when I found myself sometimes watching those matches on my phone on the way home from work. I'm sitting on the bus and I got my headphones in, my iPhone in my hand, and I'm watching some of these G1 matches that I have loaded up on my phone as I'm coming home from work on a Monday evening. And then I immediately put Raw on. Holy shit, was that a mistake? I'd like to think that the G1 was really that good, but I have to say, going from the G1 to Raw like 2 hours later probably made the G1 look that much better, and it may have clouded my judgment a little bit. It's like, wow, you go from the G1 climax to Monday Night Raw. Boy, there's no comparison between the two. I mean, they're two totally different shows. One is just straight wrestling, straight competition. Raw's a variety show. Has the comedy and everything else. I get that, but You go from one to the other, and it's an eye-opening experience when you do that. I would not advise that you do that, by the way, because WWE will lose every single time. It's almost not fair to them. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me who do I think is the best in the world, my opinion, it's either Okada or AJ Styles. There really is nobody in WWE right now who compares or who is allowed to compare. They're not able to go out there and have the kind of 20, 30, 40-minute matches that these guys are able to in Japan. And we'll end with this from Gabe in California. If you were the WWE champion, who on the current roster would you face at WrestleMania? Would you be booked as a face or a heel? And lastly, who would you face if you could pick anybody from any decade from any promotion? That is a great question. If I were the WWE champion and can pick anybody from the current roster to work with, first of all, I would be heel. I just think I would be better at that, and it'd probably be a lot more fun. So I would work as a heel, and I would want to work against a babyface Seth Rollins. I said it earlier, Seth Rollins, long-term, his future is as a babyface, not a heel. At one point earlier this year, he surpassed Daniel Bryan, in my book, as having the best babyface comeback of anybody on that roster. Because for months, for the longest time, stretching back to last year, Bryan had that locked up. I mean, he had that shit locked up. There was nobody else on that entire roster who had a better babyface comeback where he would just get the crowd going nuts. He was the House of Fire. He was flying all over the place. Nobody had a better babyface comeback than Daniel Bryan. Until the Shield suddenly went face, and I saw Seth Rollins making babyface comebacks on TV, and the people were going even more apeshit for them. And he's flying around even more than Bryan was. If anything, he was, I thought, way too reckless. Because there were times when Seth Rollins would be flying around and he would just clear the ropes and jump over the top rope out to the floor like a cannonball, and he was a crazy man. He looked like he was going to kill himself. I just hoped every time that he wouldn't die. So he was a little crazy like that, but you know, he had the best babyface comeback of anybody in the company, and I think he has that in him. I would love as a heel, you know, to work against somebody like that who's a great wrestler, who can bump around, and who could really get the fans into his match. To me, that's what it's all about, man. That'd be a lot of fun to be in the ring with somebody like that. So those would be the circumstances. He would be my opponent. If I had to pick anybody from any decade, any promotion to work with, who would I pick? I mean, I have to go with Stone Cold Steve Austin at his peak. So we're talking Attitude Era Austin, 1998, 1999, when he had the crowd in the palm of his hand everywhere he went. The crowds were filled, sold out, you know, middle fingers up in the air, screaming their heads off. I mean, how much fun would that be? I mean, to be working against Stone Cold at his peak. Most of all, though, I just want to take a Stone Cold Stunner. That would be my real reason for wanting to work Austin. I just want to eat a stunner at the end of the match, sell the shit out of it, let him pin me, pour beer all over my face. That would be a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for this edition of Sound Off Inbox here on YouTube. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this channel because I do plan to do more of these in the future. We have other reviews. I've reviewed books, DVDs. I just did a SummerSlam 2014 review talking Cena vs. Lesnar. I don't get to do that every month, but I had some free time, so you'll find that on the channel as well. We have old classic episodes of the Sound Off that date back to when I started the podcast in 2007. The first 40 episodes or so are no longer available online, so I am slowly uploading each of those early shows to YouTube. We have the first 9 episodes of the Sound Off, so I think now we're up to January of 2008, so you'll find those elsewhere on the channel. We have a lot of good stuff on here, so please do subscribe. And if you like what you hear, again, please do consider making a PayPal donation. The podcast I do every week, it's not premium or anything like that. These videos, these are bonus shows that I do for my listeners and fans of the show. If you want to contribute in some way and support the Sound Off, you can do so by making a PayPal donation on the Solomonster.com. I do a deal on my show where $10 or more gets you a wrestling nickname. I do shout-outs at the beginning of every podcast, so please do consider that. Or you can also sign up for a free Audible trial. Audible.com has a great audiobook service. We have a custom URL that you can use, audibletrial.com/Solomonster. Use that URL and you sign up. You get free 30 days. to use the service. You get 1 free audio book, which is pretty cool because you get to keep that book whether you stick with it or not. So do spread the word, let other people know, and if you want to sign up for it and give it a shot, use our URL, audibletrial.com/Solomonster. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter, @Solomonster, and I think that about does it. So thank you for your continued support. We will be back, of course, with a brand new Sound Off podcast on the Solomonster.com this weekend, and hopefully more of these in the very near future. So until then, be well, stay safe. Thank you for sending in those questions. Keep them coming. thesolomonster@gmail.com. And we will see you right back here for a new inbox very soon. Take care, guys.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. The Solomonster sounds off.
Jonathan writes in, Sheamus and Dean Ambrose don't defend their U.S. title for weeks and how the titles mean shit. Let me school you, son. There's a big difference now, today, between the world title and the secondary titles. WWE has done a horrendous job. So they lose and they lose and they lose, and soon enough, people look at them as losers who happen to carry around a belt. That's not how you make your title seem important. Your champion should look strong. So now that I shot down your argument there, if Brock comes back and defends the title at Survivor Series, and then again at the Rumble, and again at Mania, the world will not end. Business will not die. But I guarantee you those Brock Lesnar title defenses are going to be must-see TV when they happen. So eat your sour grapes and just relax.
The Solomonster sounds off. Available at thesolomonster.com, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, iTunes, and more.
Let me school you, son.